Officer Tyler Grant's body cam clearly recorded the sound of metal locking behind Special Agent Jordan Blake's back at 11:42 am, in front of the Chase Bank, handcuffing a man before verifying his identity. It wasn't standard procedure. The frame shook slightly as Grant grabbed Jordan Blake's right wrist and pulled it behind him. The yellow Ferrari was parked about 5 paces from the bank's glass doors. The license plate was straight and clear. The envelope of cash fell from Jordan Blake's left hand and skidded across the concrete. One stack slid to a stop right at the tip of Grant's shoe. A security camera on the awning captured the whole scene from above. A man across the street held his phone chest high. A woman near the ATM turned her whole body toward the parking lot. Tyler Grant stood just off the right side of the Ferrari. The initial distance between the two men was about 10 feet. Grant's gaze swept over the car, then settled on Jordan Blake. The radio on his shoulder remained silent as he approached. Grant knocked twice on the driver's side window. "Whose Ferrari is this?" Jordan Blake turned to face Grant. He raised both hands to his chest, palms open. "It's mine. I'm an FBI agent." Grant's eyes traveled from Jordan Blake's shoes up to his shoulders. He tilted his head toward the hood of the car. "A guy like you doesn't drive this car." Jordan Blake pulled back the edge of his black windbreaker. The letters FBI were clear across his chest. A metal badge was partially visible. "You can verify the badge." Grant kept his distance, about 3 feet away. His hand rested on his belt instead of reaching for the badge. He shifted his position, blocking the path between Jordan Blake and the car door. "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." Jordan Blake took a small step back. His hands were still in front of his body. "I'm not resisting." Grant grabbed his right wrist and pulled hard. The envelope of cash fell to the ground. The sound of the impact was clear on the body cam. Grant spun Jordan Blake around toward the patrol car. The back door of the cruiser was already open. "Stop resisting." Jordan Blake moved in the direction he was being pulled. His hands were still in front of him. "My ID is in my inside jacket pocket." Grant placed a hand on the middle of Jordan Blake's back. The inside pocket was never opened. The radio on his shoulder never crackled with a request for verification. The metal badge was still visible under the sunlight. Grant pulled Jordan Blake's left arm behind his back. His right arm was brought back right after. The metal cuffs closed with a short click. The body cam clearly recorded the moment they were locked. 2 other patrol cars turned into the parking lot. One car stopped about 6 feet from the Ferrari. The other stopped parallel to the first patrol car. On its right side, the lights on the roof reflected off the windshield. Sergeant Brian Cole stepped out of the second car. His eyes stopped on the letters FBI on the jacket. He looked at the wrists cuffed behind the man's back. The phone lens across the street was still pointed at the group. "Have you verified his identity?" Tyler Grant stood by the door of the patrol car. "He's not cooperating." Jordan Blake turned his head toward Sergeant Brian Cole. "I already identified myself." Cole took 2 more steps closer. The distance was now about 5 feet. He stood still for a few seconds, observing both the Ferrari and the man in cuffs. No request to run the license plate had been made. Grant kept both his hands on his belt. The envelope of cash was picked up and placed on the hood of the Ferrari. The security camera continued to record the entire parking lot. The man across the street kept his phone steady. The woman near the ATM didn't move from her spot. Jordan Blake stood next to the back door of the patrol car, his hands cuffed behind his back. The cuffs remained locked behind Jordan Blake's back as Sergeant Brian Cole stood about 5 feet away from him. Cole tilted his head, looking at the FBI letters on the jacket. He glanced down at the envelope of cash on the hood. Tyler Grant stood slightly behind him, his hands placed on his belt. The lights on the patrol car's roof still reflected on the Ferrari's glass. The man across the street continued to hold his phone at eye level. "Where's your ID?" Jordan Blake stood straight. "In my left inside pocket." Sergeant Brian Cole stepped closer. He stood on Jordan Blake's left side. The distance was now less than 3 feet. Cole reached out and gently pulled open the jacket. The metal badge was now in full view. He pulled the card out of the inside pocket. Tyler Grant didn't move from his position. Grant stared at the card in Cole's hand. He didn't say anything else. Sergeant Brian Cole flipped the ID over. Looked at the front. He looked at the back for another second. He took 2 steps back. Cole raised the radio to his mouth. "Dispatch. Running a federal ID." A voice came back over the radio after a few seconds. Cole read the name and ID number out loud. He waited for a response. Tyler Grant turned his head and looked toward the second patrol car. A few seconds of silence passed. The light wind rustled the hem of Jordan Blake's jacket. The handcuffs were still on. The radio crackled with a confirmation. "The ID checks out. Status is active. Office is based 2 counties over." Sergeant Brian Cole lowered the radio. He looked straight at Tyler Grant. "Take the cuffs off." Grant stood still for a second. Then he walked up behind Jordan Blake. He pulled the cuff key from his pocket. There was the soft click of metal turning. The cuff came off the right wrist first, then the left. Jordan Blake brought his hands around to his front. Red marks were visible on his skin. He lowered his hands to his sides. He didn't make any sudden moves. Sergeant Brian Cole handed the ID back to Jordan Blake. He kept a step's distance. Tyler Grant stood off to the right. He looked at the Ferrari, then down at the ground. Jordan Blake took the ID and put it in his inside jacket pocket. He took a step to the left, away from the patrol car door. There were about 6 feet between him and Grant. The man with the camera took another small step forward. The lens was still pointed right at them. The woman by the ATM was still standing there. Sergeant Brian Cole turned to Tyler Grant. The 2 of them spoke quietly. Too low for the mic to pick up clearly. Grant shook his head once. Cole held his gaze for a few seconds. Jordan Blake walked toward the hood of the Ferrari. He took the money envelope back. The money was placed neatly back inside. He opened the driver's side door but didn't get in yet. Tyler Grant took 1 step forward. He stopped when he was about 10 feet from Jordan Blake. No apology was recorded on the body cam. Sergeant Brian Cole spoke just loud enough to be heard. "Do you want to file a report?" Jordan Blake closed the Ferrari's door. He turned to face Cole. "I want to file a report." Cole gave a short nod. He jotted a few lines in a small notebook. Grant stood nearby, his hands still on his belt. A bank employee stepped out of the glass doors. He stood near the steps. The distance to the Ferrari was about 15 feet. No one moved any closer. Sergeant Brian Cole told Tyler Grant to go back to the first patrol car. Grant walked over, opened the car door, and got a notepad. He leaned lightly against the car door as he wrote. Jordan Blake opened the driver's door again. He got into the seat, his hands on the steering wheel. The door was still open. He didn't start the car right away. Sergeant Brian Cole stood between the 2 patrol cars. He spoke briefly on his radio one more time. The sound wasn't loud. The patrol cars turned off their roof lights. Tyler Grant closed his notepad. He walked around the back of the patrol car. Grant didn't approach the Ferrari again. Jordan Blake closed his car door. He put on his seatbelt. The engine started with a short roar. The Ferrari backed out of the parking spot about 3 feet. Sergeant Brian Cole stood and watched. Tyler Grant stood 2 steps away from him. The man who was filming lowered his phone as the car started to leave the lot. The Ferrari turned out of the area in front of the bank and merged onto the main road. The yellow Ferrari left the parking lot, merging onto the main road at 11:53. Later that day, The video from the bank's camera appeared on social media. The footage was unedited. The audio was intact from beginning to end. The line, "Someone like you doesn't drive this car," could be heard clearly. The click of the handcuffs echoed the timestamp in the corner of the screen. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the local FBI field office sent a formal request to the city police department. They wanted the incident report and all body cam footage. The email included a federal case number. The next morning, the police chief ordered all radio traffic logs and original reports to be collected. Tyler Grant's previous traffic stops were put under review. Old complaints were reopened to check for a pattern of behavior. That evening, Jordan Blake sat in his small office. His computer was open to a blank document. He typed out the timeline. 11:42. Approach. 11:47. Cuffed. 11:50. Radio. Verification. 11:53. Cuffs off. There were no personal remarks in his report. Just positions, distances, and verbatim quotes. 3 days later, 2 internal affairs investigators sat across from Jordan Blake in a small conference room. A recorder sat on the table between them. One of them read a line from the video. When he said, "People like you," how did you interpret that? Jordan Blake's answer was short. "I recorded the statement verbatim." The investigator nodded and moved on. They checked off each timestamp against the video. Across town, Officer Tyler Grant sat in a temporary office. His badge was on the desk. He wasn't assigned a patrol car. Grant signed the notice for his paid administrative leave. A week later, a civil attorney filed a federal lawsuit. The suit listed 3 main counts: unlawful detainment, unnecessary use of force, and civil rights violations. The filing included a copy of the video and the dispatch verification logs. The local news ran the story that same evening. 2 days later, the national channels were playing the full video. The city's name was on the evening news. The city council held a closed-door session on Tuesday night. The finance director presented a cost estimate for going to trial. The number appeared on the projector screen. 7 figures. 2 weeks later, the deposition took place in a long conference room. Grant sat on the right side of the table. The lawyer placed a photo from the body cam in front of him. The picture clearly showed the letters FBI on the jacket. "Do you see these letters?" Grant looked at the photo. His answer was short. "I wasn't paying attention at the time." The lawyer moved to the next frame. Half of the metal badge was visible. "Did you check his pocket?" Grant was silent for a few seconds, then answered, "No." The deposition was added to the case file. 3 months later, the city offered a settlement. The meeting took place in a closed room. No cameras. Jordan Blake sat on the left side with his lawyer. A representative for the city sat on the opposite side. A number was put on the table. $5 million. No public statement clause. No admission of wrongdoing. 2 weeks later, the settlement was approved on a Tuesday morning. The document was signed by the city representative and Jordan Blake's lawyer. The payment was recorded in the fiscal year budget. That same day, a disciplinary decision was handed to Tyler Grant. It read, termination, violation of procedure, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. His badge was collected at the commander's office. His personal locker was sealed and handed over. After his termination, Grant applied for jobs at 2 private security firms. The background check noted the civil suit and the settlement payout. Both applications were rejected. There was no long press conference. A brief press release was posted on the city's website. Grant's name did not appear in the headline. 6 months later, the video was incorporated into the internal training program. The video was paused at the moment of the handcuffing. The instructor pointed to the timestamp. The only question asked was verification performed? Jordan Blake went back to his normal life. He didn't buy a new car. The Ferrari was still registered in his name. The settlement money was transferred to his account. As agreed, part of it paid for medical bills. Part of it paid the lawyer's fees. The rest was put into a family trust. One afternoon, Jordan Blake drove past the Chase Bank. The parking lot was the same. The camera on the awning was still working. The automatic glass doors opened and closed for each customer coming and going. The Ferrari drove by without stopping. I believe the records and the footage speak for themselves. What do you think about the way this was handled? If you found value in this story, please share it and leave a comment. Subscribe to the Power Misplaced Stories channel for the next case. Model.